Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the third edition of the University Chair Lecture Series. It's so great to see all of you. Thank you for coming. So today, we have a special lecture by Professor Jason Colquitt, the Franklin D. Church Professor in the Department of Management and Organization, and the academic director, the founding academic director of the PhD in Management program. Jason will deliver today's talk, Insights on Trust and Justice in Organizational Life. I hope that all of you will also stay for the reception in the atrium afterwards. The University Chair Lecture Series is an important way for us as a college to recognize, be inspired by, and very importantly, to celebrate how our faculty grow the good in business through their research. How important it is to have a thriving research culture here at Mendoza. The previous University Chair lectures, glad to see you, Mike Grant, the Notre Dame Professor of Management and Organization, and last semester by Ahmed Abbasi, the Joe and Jane Giovanni Professor of IT, Analytics and Operations. Both were very illuminating and also entertaining. Today, Jason continues this tradition of elevating the significance of research and allowing us to recognize and celebrate, in this case, Jason's research. I also want to welcome a very special guest, Professor John Hollenbeck, the Associate Dean of Research at Michigan State University's Eli Broad College of Business. Professor Hollenbeck served as Jason's doctoral advisor, an experience he will tell us more about shortly. So Professor John Hollenbeck will actually be introducing Jason. I'm introducing I'll welcome. My main job is to welcome you. Then next, Anne ten Brunsel, the chair of the Management Organization Department, will introduce Professor Hollenbeck, who will then introduce Jason. Okay. So we think that by the number of people who are introducing the speaker, that should reflect our respect and admiration of the speaker. So before Anne comes up, I also have to say a few words about Jason. All-around star, we're so lucky to have him. In research, teaching, and service, he's really exemplary. Over 60,000 citations. But it's also, I think, very special, and again, such a wonderful thing for us as a university, that we are a university with a distinctly Catholic mission, both with a capital C and a small c. And your areas, Jason, of justice, trust, meaning, personality, identity, they deeply resonate with our mission at the university and at Mendoza. A prodigious career. I will not name all the awards and distinctions, but just please know of our deep admiration and respect, and how glad we are that you decided to come to Notre Dame, and how really grateful we are for the leadership that you have shown since coming here. Especially, but not only, but especially in the founding of a milestone for the college, the doctoral program in management. Through this program, you have very successfully recruited very talented candidates. Thank you all for being here, who are already contributing in your own way to your discipline with your research. So by doing so, you, Jason, have really helped us to shape the future of business research that contributes to human flourishing. So we're very honored to recognize Jason's great work here today. And I now invite Anne ten Brunsel to introduce Professor Hollenbeck. Thank you.
I give my thanks as well. Thank you all for taking time out of your day to honor our esteemed colleague. They say the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. And so to understand the apple, it's useful to understand the tree that helped grow and develop that apple. So it is my pleasure to introduce and say a few words about John Hollenbeck. As Martin said, he is the University Distinguished Professor and the Eli Broad University Professor at the Eli Broad College of Management at Michigan State University, where he also serves as the Associate Dean for Research. He did his undergraduate at St. Bonaventure, started his PhD at Purdue, and finished his PhD at NYU. And if we go back early, and I mean really early, John's academic lineage can be traced to Charles Darwin. It goes Charles Darwin, Francis Galton, Carl Pearson, Jerzy Neyman, to Jacob Cohen, and Jacob Cohen was on John's committee. Now, what that also means is Jason gets to claim that same lineage. And so do all of you who has Jason as their advisor. I would describe John as a loyalist. He spent his entire academic career at Michigan State for 40 years. He has studied teams, including structure, performance, and composition. He studied goal attainment, goal commitment through the perspective of self-regulation, and also looks at employee acquisition and separation processes. By my count, and I'm sure you have now in the 3 digits because I think I had an old CV, he has 98 articles published, and at least 73 of those are in top-tier journals. 4 of those, if I counted right, are with Jason on team decision-making accuracy, 2 in JAP, 1 in OBHDP, 1 in AMJ. And he also has 3 papers with another esteemed M&O colleague, Mike Manor. 3 papers. He is the recipient of 30 grants from the Army, Air Force, and Navy, as well as the National Science Foundation. At least 10 of those are more than $500,000. I'm looking at Ken saying, do not be expecting me to get these. And 2 of those are more than $1 million. He was the editor of Peace Psych and also served on the board there for 25 years. And I understand that during that time, the process was the most smooth it ever had been and ever will be, thanks to the editorial assistant, whose name is Patty Hollenbeck, who I think is in the audience with us. Thank you for joining us. He also served 28 years on the board of OBHDP, 26 at AMJ, 24 at JAP, 16 at AMR. He is a fellow at AOM, at APA, and at SIOP. He has 2 mentorship awards from AOM, from the OB and HR division, and 2 Lifetime Achievement Awards from those same divisions. And 2 years ago, he was awarded the All Academy Distinguished Educator Award. He has been on 41 dissertation committees and chaired another 33 dissertation committees, with students of his probably resonating with some in this room: Jeff Lapine, Chris Barnes, Scott DeRue, and this guy named Jason Colquitt. I asked Jason to share a few words about John, and I know he's going to say a few words himself, but I think these anecdotes really give you insight into the relationship that they had. Jason said he was working as an undergraduate at IU and working with Tim Baldwin, and Tim told him that John was the best at training doctoral students. So Jason applied. John was the PhD coordinator at the time, called Jason up to give him his acceptance, and before he could finish the sentence, Jason accepted, leading to what John said was the fastest acceptance he's ever received. Glad you were enthused, Jason, but I don't think I'll be putting you in front of a class to teach negotiations anytime soon. Jason took research methods in his first semester from John Hollenbeck, which will resonate with our doctoral students because Jason teaches them that same class. And despite the fact that John gave Jason a B- on a test, I really am just saying that for the doctoral students here, I thought you would get a kick out of that. Jason called him the best example of a transformational leader that there is. Transformational leader transforms the way we view our work through providing inspirational motivation. And Jason told me this story. John was about to submit a paper and asked Jason to do a reference check, where you make sure all the references in the text are in the reference section and vice versa. So Jason went home, read the paper, came back in the morning and said, I found 2 mistakes. And John said, that's interesting. I found 5. And he says, my guess is that you don't quite understand the significance of this exercise. References are thank you notes. They're our chance to thank the people who do the work that our work is now building upon. I'm sure you take great care when writing thank you notes. You should take the same care when crafting references. And Jason concluded to say, to this day, I love crafting the reference sections on my papers. I thought that is probably the first and only time I will hear that. Jason then ended with saying, John did the 2 most important things an advisor can do. He taught me the essence of what it is to be a scientist, and he made me want to be that. John, there is no doubt that the apple did not fall far from the tree. Like you, Jason is an amazingly prolific scholar. Like you, he is a wonderful teacher, mentor, and advisor. And like you, he doesn't just focus on publishing, but he gives of his talents to the department, to his students, to the college, the university, and his profession. Jason, while we would say that a good advisor is not a sufficient condition or a guarantee of success, I think most of us would say it's an extremely important one. I know how grateful I am to my advisor, and I know you must feel equally blessed to have studied under John. Please join me in welcoming John Hollenbeck.
I was going to walk the long way. I was going to walk the long way from here up that stage, both to create drama, and I didn't know if I had the vertical leap to get over this, and I didn't want to fall after that beautiful introduction. Thank you very much. I can't tell you how happy I am to be here at what I consider America's #1 premier Catholic university. As a graduate of St. Joseph's Elementary School, St. Bonaventure University, I've been strongly imprinted by Franciscans my whole life. So for me to be in a room that has a crucifix on there, I can't tell you how warm that makes me feel. I know it's the congregation of Holy Cross, and that's really good too. Sorry, it's a little Catholic banter there. It's a little Franciscan humor. At least it's not Vincentians. Don't even get me started. Okay, no, I can't be more pleased to be here and doing this. Introducing Jason Colquitt, who's seriously, I've had a lot of great students, and he is definitely the best OB student we've ever had at Michigan State. Obviously, strategy, that's Mike. And so I don't know how you're piling up all this Michigan State talent, but all I can say is congratulations. I actually have slides. This is a weird thing because I'm introducing somebody. And by the way, I thought there should be somebody to introduce the dean. I felt like we were one introduction short there, but anyway, my apologies to you. So I'm introducing somebody you know already, so it's kind of like tricky. And so I'm going to give you what I consider Jason's career-defining moments completely from my own personal perspective. First of all, as a PhD applicant, it is absolutely true that Jason was in the ratio of best student versus easiest student to recruit. Oh, far away, #1. Literally said, the minute you tell me I'm accepted at Michigan State, I'm accepting your offer. And Jason, we didn't even have an offer ready for you then. But so yeah, it probably wasn't the most negotiated thing. But yeah, he was super easy to recruit. And he came at a very important time in my life. The relationship between you and your mentor, it's not a one-way street, man. It is, we got to help each other. And he really helped get our team lab on the map. We've gotten a lot of funding in our team lab. We got over $10 million, and that was really just, we were still working on our first grant at that time. So that kind of got us going. And I honestly don't believe the team lab could be where it is today without Jason being there to kind of support it. Now, as great as it was recruiting Jason, okay, eventually these young people, they get their PhD. And then they go out and they go to other schools, and then you have to recruit against them. I hated recruiting against Jason Colquitt when it came to getting PhD students. He was amazing. Okay, here we go. Ian Crawford, Nathan Pozikoff, Brent Scott, Christine Jackson, Cindy Zapata, the Jessicas, Jessica Method, Jessica Rodell, Michael Beer, Katie Zapata, who I just wrote a letter for, by the way. I hope half the people on this list, I failed to recruit successfully. I cried when I wrote this list when I think about how much time. The one that bothered me the most was Nathan Pozikoff, because like Nathan literally told me he was coming to Michigan State, and then he went radio silent. And I couldn't figure out. And Jason finally told me, "Oh no, Nathan's coming to Florida." And I call up Nathan. I go, "Nathan, I thought you were coming to Michigan State." And this is my Nathan Pozikoff impersonation. "John, I had no way how to tell you, and so I didn't." That's Nathan. That's Nathan dead on. By the way, I just wrote a letter for Nathan, which is scary because I also wrote a letter for his dad, Phil. And so when you're writing letters for both the son and the father, but the worst thing is I've done that 2 other times. if you're Crystal Farr, I wrote a letter for Crystal Farr and Larry Farr. And I just wrote a letter for Emily Campion, and because I wrote a letter for her dad, Mike Campion. So you're getting old when you're doing that. It was brutal to recruit against Jason. It was just tough. Another area was very brutal to compete against Jason. He has really an unbelievably well-selling OB textbook. I know this because I have an OB textbook that I can't sell. And I can't sell because I got an HR textbook that I can sell. I can't sell that book because of Jason. So he's really tough to compete with there. Another really significant moment for me with Jason was when he became the editor of AMJ. Now, as much as you love Jason, I know you love, okay, but when you're free and you get your PhD, okay, you're kind of free of your advisor. And when you're the editor of AMJ, oh man, this is the pinnacle. And Jason said, wow, I'm finally at the pinnacle of this. And they said, well, no, you report to the journals committee. The AMJ has a journals committee. And he says, well, who's the chair of the journals committee? They said, John Hollenbeck. And I could just see Jason going, you've got to be kidding me. Of all the gin joints and all the places in all the world, I can't believe John Hollenbeck's running that. Jason was absolutely, I watched that I had an inside seat for that. He was the best editor of AMJ. And the editors of AMJ right now are screwing it up. And I tell them that at every point as a former journal committee. There's 3 things that Jason did that they are not doing now that they've got to get back to. Number 1, he increased the number of manuscripts published. Versus Associate Dean for Research, I follow all the units, finance, marketing, whatever. And management is the worst, okay? Our professional journals publishing enough articles for our young people to get tenured and promoted. We're literally killing our young people. Jason worked so hard to expand the number of publications there. I don't think they come anywhere near that. Second, Jason was fast. He turned these manuscripts around. Okay, if you're going to reject every manuscript, fine, but could you reject it a little bit faster, please? I feel like now the thing goes way too slow, and it goes way too many rounds. And when I was a kid growing up, when I wasn't dodging dinosaurs, I mean, you could put a paper through 4 or 5 journals in a year. Get rejected here, move it along. Now they're holding your paper for like a year and a half. And then the third thing, if he gave you a revise and resubmit, that was a commitment that meant something. And if he gave you a second round revise and resubmit, you could be confident that no paper should be rejected after the 3rd round. That's just indecisiveness. That was a poor first round decision. By far, he was the greatest editor of AMJ. Lastly, talk about him as a researcher. Again, he was easy to recruit because Tim Baldwin already recruited him. We lost Tim Baldwin a couple of years ago. And I believe that Tim Baldwin is looking down on us today, he's like, hey man, I introduced these 2 cats to each other. And so that gives me a warm feeling. Jason did not follow in my footsteps. I do team research. He did research on justice. He followed the footsteps of Donald Conlon. And we lost Donald Conlon 2 years ago today. And again, I feel like Donald Conlon's looking down on us today, thinking, I introduced this guy to justice. John Hollenbeck didn't introduce him to justice. Donald Conlon did. And so when I look at Jason, I see all the people that imprinted Jason. I see my friend Don Conlon. I see my friend Tim Baldwin, and I see those qualities in Jason. His record is amazing. He has over 50 publications. He has 62,000 citations, which is an interesting number. Just to put this in scale for you, as Ann so kindly pointed out, I'm doing okay. Okay, I'm doing okay. I got 33,000. I've been in the business for 41 years. He has 62,000, which is just amazing. So when I look at him now, I remember this punk that was so easy to recruit. Now he has become my hero. And not just my hero, a superhero. A superhero. Scales of justice. With the scales of justice are tilted, Jason Copeland goes into a phone booth. Okay, we'll talk later about what a phone booth is. He goes into a phone booth and he changes it. And why you would dress in a phone booth, once I explain it to you, why would you do that in a phone booth? I don't know. But he turns into Super Jason. And this is the way I view him. Super AM Jason. He's a cartoon he's a cartoon fan, and he's got his own character. And shout out to James D. Shaw, who is the person that came up with this. So with that, I finally get to introduce you to Jason. I have no idea who he's going to introduce. But it's my pleasure to introduce my friend, Jason Colquitt. Thank you very much.
You see? Well, thank you, Martin, for creating this event. It was a lot of fun to watch Mike's. It was a lot of fun to watch Ahmed's. It comes on the heels of Martin also recommending me for all faculty team, so I got to be on the Jumbotron. So there's just an awful lot of attention in these 10 days, and I am grateful, certainly, for all of it. Thank you, Ann, for introducing John in that way. You're the best department chair in the business. We're super happy to have you. And John, I'll talk about you in just a little bit. Just a little bit. I'll talk about a few things. I'll start by giving you some sense of my background, how I got here. I'll talk about early work on justice and trust. That is what this talk is about. And Martin, it does mean a lot to me that the work that I do is somehow resonant and synergistic with growth and good in business and the nature of the place. And you can come in and the second giver of this talk is kind of lurking in the shadows, incognito. I'll talk about some more recent research, but I also wanted to talk about something that is resonant for anybody who's in a faculty position in this room, even if you don't care about justice or trust, which is what makes you motivated to keep doing this. John, when I introduced you for the OBE Lifetime Achievement Award, one of the things that struck me is you've been enormously productive over the last 5 years. Well, how do you keep wanting to do this over the long haul? So I got my start at Indiana University, 3.5 hours south of here. This is me as a freshman in my dorm room. You can see that I had great taste in computers, even back then. Not very good taste in candy. Where did I get a ring pop? I don't really remember ever consuming a ring pop. Also sad to say, Dean, that's the same 5 championships that we have in basketball. Not a single new banner has been hung ever since. But I was accepted into a program. It's a program that they still have today called the Liberal Arts Management Program. So you major in a liberal arts, but you also get to double major in the Kelley School. And so I spent my 4 years in 2 buildings, in the psychology building, didn't have that strange brain sculpture back then, and in the Kelley School of Business, which were helpfully for me, were right across the street from each other. And so my general plan at that point was, I'm going to get a PhD in industrial and organizational psychology. My older brother, Alan, had a PhD from Wayne State in IO Psych. By that point, he was working for Eli Lilly. Alan liked his job. It seemed like a good path for me. And so I knew what most psych majors know. I'm a psych major. I'm going to grad school. So I wanted to graduate with honors. And I wanted to do an honors thesis that was somehow workish. But I didn't really have any professors in psych who had done anything like that. And so I was kind of racking my brain trying to come up with a thesis topic. And I had taken organizational behavior the previous summer. John, not from your book. It was a horrible book. I'm trying to figure, what did I take in OB that I liked? And I'm going through this book, and I'm going through my notes. And the closest thing I found was, I like the stuff on brainstorming. I have 3 or 4 pages in this book on brainstorming. I seem to like that day. I'm going to do a thesis on brainstorming, but I got to find a thesis advisor. And so I knocked on a gentleman's door, Dr. Jerome Cherkoff, and I literally said, you don't know who I am. I want to do a thesis on brainstorming. Will you be my thesis advisor, even though we've never met? And he said, sure, kid, come on in and sit down. Give me your idea. And I said, well, what I'm really interested in is what if you lock these people in a room for 3 hours, you have them brainstorm on some really important problem, they come out, and you say, yeah, good idea, we're not doing that. And so you don't take the idea that they spent that much time coming up with. And he looked to the side, and he was kind of thinking, and I wasn't sure what he was doing in the moment, but now I get it, because this is something that we all do now. He was taking what I had said, and he was attaching constructs to what I had said. And he said, okay, that's not a brainstorming idea. That's a justice idea. He stood up, walked over to just a seemingly endless array of steel filing cabinets, was rummaging through this drawer and that drawer, and he handed me 2 articles, Folger and Greenberg 83 and Greenberg and Folger 85. I said, read these, talk to me on Monday, and we'll go from there. And so what my thesis did was created that context. You had undergrad and an experiment doing something that in some conditions you don't listen to. And what Dr. Cherkoff had shown me is that frustration that they feel in that moment is tinged with unfairness. So we varied whether they got the outcome they wanted or not. We varied how much we explained that decision. And then they did a task and we assessed effort. And so some years later, many years later, this paper was published in Journal of Management. It was my 3rd publication on justice. You can see it didn't quite break through. Whoever those 269 people are, I thank them. I am very rarely among them. I don't find much occasion to cite this paper. But it showed me something that eventually, when Don got to Michigan State, I developed a deeper appreciation for. Well, as I mentioned, I want to go to IO Psych programs. There's a work aspect to that, so I thought to myself, I also need research experience in business. And so my older brother, Alan, introduced me to Tim Baldwin in the business school. And we worked together for almost 2 years on a paper that never really went anywhere. It was a cooperative learning paper. But I remember the day when it came time to finalize my list of schools that I was going to apply to and talk about those deadlines. And Tim looks at the list. It's mostly IO programs, a handful of OB programs. It's like, okay, I get all this. You want to do what your brother does. I get it. I like your brother. Your brother's great. But we've worked together a while now. You've seen my life up close. What's the matter with my life? And I looked at him, and in that moment, it was one of those glass-shattering moments where I'm like, wow, nothing is wrong with your life. Your life is pretty good. And so we took out a pen, we started marking out programs not going to apply to, circled Michigan State, and the rest took care of itself. And Tim said exactly what Ann said. It's like, go to Michigan State. Even if all you do is take his class, it's worth it. But if you can do more than that, that's even more worth it. So at this point, I've got a career path. I've got a thesis to finish. I got subjects to run. Something else important happened as I go into my senior year, which is that I met a beautiful and stunning fellow psych major who was also doing her honors thesis. I actually have my honors thesis here today. This is my third publication on justice. This is Catherine's honors thesis. You can see it is thicker than mine, about twice as thick as mine. We met at a time that we were both applying to graduate school. So it is a relationship speeder-upper because you have to decide, are we going to coordinate where we apply? Are we going to coordinate what we decide? And of course, we decided that we would. And I wound up at Michigan State. She wound up in a master's program about 3 hours away. And over the course of our 5 years there, we had an incredible time. She finished her master's. We got married my second year in the program. We were terribly poor. $14,000 a year stipend because I didn't negotiate. I could have got that up to 14.5 or 14.6, no problem. Catherine worked as a counseling psychologist, making somewhat more than that. We lived next door to a house that had at the time 8 broken down Oldsmobiles in the backyard. Those may remain the only Oldsmobiles still on this planet. I don't know. They raised pit bulls for dogfighting. And so they had this pen of pit bull puppies outside of our bedroom window. And so all night long, one puppy would chomp down on the ear of the other puppy. And there would just be this squealing all night. But we always felt very safe there because the police were there almost every night. This is about the safest place in East Lansing. I passed comps. That's me studying for comps. I learned SPSS. That's my 2 different SPSS manuals on the floor there. We did tailgating, as we will do on Saturday. And then I eventually graduated. For reasons I do not recall, graduated in a master's hood. As a DRAB, which stands for Business Master's Hood. I didn't know that at the time until people started saying, oh, congrats, what are you getting your master's in? Why don't I have a blue hood? I didn't know I needed a blue hood. But there's so many things I learned at Michigan State. And John, I can tell you, I still have all the notes from your class. I'm not going to let any of you see these notes because what you will see is, wow, a lot of this sounds really familiar. In fact, the entire structure of this syllabus just really seems familiar. I want you to think I'm creative in my design of these classes. I learned the importance of sound measurement. One of John's most impactful early articles was a measure of goal commitment, a really important construct in goal-setting theory that had not been well operationalized. And that stuck with me. Because if you can't measure something well, a research area can't take off and accumulate valid knowledge. I learned the importance of rigorous experiments. I ran a lot of subjects in the team lab, both papers I was on and papers I wasn't on. And it was a sense of seeing all the various ways that you can conduct a 1 or 2 or 3 hour experiment and how solid that evidence was at the end of it. I learned the importance of approaching a study with a theoretical lens or framework that was a proper noun. John used to say, your theory should be like your bologna. Your bologna has a first name. It's OSCAR. your baloney has a second name. It's Mayer. This is an old commercial. In the same way that your baloney has a name, your theoretical lens ought to have a name. And I learned the importance of framing a contribution. There's a lot of people in this field that get an idea, rush out, collect data, and then ask themselves, what's the first 5 paragraphs of this paper going to be? We never had to have that conversation. We knew those first 5 paragraphs before the first participants were run in the beginning of the fall. And I learned the importance of activity level and resilience. We generated a lot of papers in the team lab. Some of those got rejected. JAP in those years was a lot like AMJ now. For a while, it wasn't called JAP, it was called PAP, the Pamphlet of Applied Psychology, because Phil Bobko didn't take anything. But it's okay as long as you keep sending that work to other places. All the students in this room, you've read John's work and your method syllabus. I lived this stuff. Right? John, I feel like there's supposed to be this time in someone's career when they put their advisor on a pedestal, but then eventually they think, you know what, I'm better at some of this stuff now. I've never felt like I am better at any parts of this job than you. When I was early in my career, people that didn't know me and didn't know where I was trained, I'd be at a consortium or something, and someone would come up to me and say, where are you from? Michigan State. Who's your advisor? And I would say, John Hollenbeck. And they would say, you talk like him. And they were saying it as kind of a funny conversational thing, but I would always feel like that is like the biggest compliment you can give me is that I sound like my advisor. That means a lot to me. So you've done so much for me over the years, and your help during the AMJ years was immense to me. And so I would not say that you taught me everything that I know, but I would absolutely say you taught me the most important things that I know. And I want you to know that I wake up every morning trying to be as good of an advisor to the students here as you have been, not just to me, but to the other however many people that Ann alluded to. So thank you for your friendship. Thank you for your support. Thank you for the kind words earlier today. My dissertation, which I also have here, in fact, it is also not as thick as Catherine's honors thesis, was on justice and teams. So I never forgot about my honors thesis. I didn't do anything with it really during graduate school. And so it was a chance to kind of bring together 2 things that I liked. The team stuff that I'd been doing for the previous 5 years, and this thing that I did back at IU. And it set the stage for a stream of research dedicated to understanding justice issues in teams. It was also a good enough dissertation that helped me get a job at a place that by then included this gentleman here, Jeff Lapine. I'll talk about Jeff in a minute. It was eventually published in Journal of Applied Psychology, becoming my 4th paper on justice. Did better than my honors thesis. I'm making incremental progress. Again, whoever those 370 people are, we thank you for your time and attention. But so, what was my early work on justice? What got me into that literature in a deeper way? Well, Jeff Lapine was at Florida. He hired me there. I was an office mate of Jeff's for 3 years of my 5 years at Michigan State. I then became next door to him for the next 12 years. We worked together a lot in those years. I think we really felt like we had this research thing figured out. And then we hired someone who is known to the hallways here, Tim Judge, who had it figured out much more than we did. Tim would say things like, I've got 8 papers under review right now. We go, what? 8 papers under review? We got to leave lunch and go back to the office. But we built one of the best departments around, one of the best PhD programs around. Both of those things remain very strong to this day. And so it was then that I really began focusing on justice as a content area. So I want to give you kind of a 10,000 feet structure for what I'll talk about with respect to both justice and trust. So we're going to start with an authority doing something. Could be a boss, could be an organization in general, some decision event that we can think about and evaluate. Well, once we think about and evaluate those things, we can have some kind of cognitive reaction. I'm going to decide that this place is like this. Or I'm going to decide that my boss is like this. We can also have some kind of emotional reaction, either a negative one or a positive one. And then that cocktail of thought and feeling affects what we intend to do relative to that authority. And then ultimately, because management is an applied field, it's important that those intentions go on to affect actual behavior, actual things with bottom line implications. Well, at that point in the justice literature, they were studying a lot of ways to evaluate authority actions. Not just Jerry Greenberg and Rob Folger, whose work I'd been given in Dr. Cherkov's office that day several years earlier. Bob Bees, Tom Tyler, Joel Brockner, and others. And there was some disagreement about taxonomically how all this stuff fit together. Is it one thing? Is it 2 things? Is it 3 or 4 things? Moreover, the literature was struggling with what psychology still struggles with today, which one recent article described as the toothbrush problem. Our measures are like toothbrushes, which is that we use them, but nobody else ever reuses them. And so you can see this is APA journals from 1993 to 2000. The mode for almost all measures, 43%, they're used one time. And this is exactly what was happening in the justice literature at the time. It was just this bevy of often rather poor ad hoc measures. So when I was in my 5th year at Michigan State, I worked on a measurement validation paper that would look at this taxonomic structure and try to create a faithful but strong measure of this terrain. And so you can see what the 4 dimensions are that were supported here: procedural justice, the fairness of the decision-making process; distributive, the actual outcome. These are reference to a supervisor. You can reference them to the organization as well. Interpersonal justice, there's some interpersonal interaction when this process is being implemented. How fair is that? And then informational justice, there's some explanation I'm giving you or not giving you during this process. How fair is that? And so there was at that point these 4 dimensions. What was also going on in literature at the time is there was no real sense of a nomological network or structure. You're studying justice in conjunction with this. You're studying justice in conjunction with this. There's no kind of map of where we're going. Well, I had taken a meta-analysis course from Jack Hunter at Michigan State in the IO program, who along with Frank Schmidt is one of the architects of bringing meta-analysis to management. And so I worked on a meta-analysis, and that effort was aided a lot by Don Conlon, who arrived right before my 5th year at Michigan State was starting. I didn't even know Don, but I said, will you be on my dissertation committee? He said yes. And we knew that we would have this 1 year together. And so we're like, let's do something together this year. And so I suggested a meta-analysis. And then we found out there was another one in the works. And so we actually got this done in about 4 months because we were trying to beat Cohen Cherish Spector to the punch, which we did by about a month. And that really changed the citation counts of both of those papers. But what came out of that meta-analysis was some nomological network for justice. What does it do? Well, it changes how you think about the authority. Perceived leader effectiveness, leader satisfaction. Changes how you feel about your job. Makes you happier with your work when you're treated fairly. It also affects certain intentions. One of those is trust, intending to accept vulnerability to somebody else. I'll come back to trust a little bit later. Organizational commitment. What makes you intend to stay where you are instead of taking some other opportunity that comes along? And then in terms of behaviors, job performance, which is very consequential, of course, but also citizenship behavior. What makes you do the optional stuff? Like come to a talk like this on a Thursday afternoon. What makes you do the things that aren't necessarily rewarded, but that when they're done a lot in your unit, make it a better place to work. Make it a better place to be. And then the flip side of that, counterproductive behavior. What makes you be absent? What makes you turn over? What makes you steal from the organization? What makes you badmouth the company to other people? And so these were my first 2 papers on justice. What is also notable about them is they came out in the very same issue of Journal of Applied Psychology. And so it was this kind of odd thing of this person's never been in this literature before. And here they're publishing these 2 things. Like it was a precocious decision to have a measure and a review in a literature you really had never worked in. You know, what these folks didn't realize is I've been thinking about this stuff for a long time, going all the way back to that honors thesis conversation. But that synchronicity really propelled me in my career as a justice scholar. Well, what about trust? I mentioned that trust was part of our meta-analysis. I'd measured trust in a couple things, but not in a really sophisticated way. It was more, we need a trust scale. We need to find a trust scale. I'm sure they're all the same. So I would say passing familiarity, but not any kind of expertise. Until I attended a session on the Wednesday of Academy in Denver. Now back then, Academy went till Wednesday. It was at 8 a.m. to noon on Wednesday. Not many people went. I don't really know why I went, much less at 8 a.m., but I did. I had gumption back then. And this session was pitting the early legacies of 2 different perspectives on trust against each other. One of them, a paper that was written right here at University of Notre Dame by Roger Mayer and Jim Davis. The other one by Dan McAllister at Georgetown. And I honestly hadn't read either one of these papers. Even though I'd measured trust in my work a time or two, I just really hadn't been that dialed in to these kinds of debates. But sitting there in the room that day, I remember thinking, this Mara Davis Scorman paper is great. In fact, it may be the best, after I read it, the best paper I've ever read. It's my Desert Island paper. We all have like a Desert Island book or a Desert Island movie. This is my Desert Island paper because I can read it again and again and get something out of it. On the other hand, the McAllister structure, it's not for me. I don't like it quite as much. And so I thought to myself in that room that day, I'm going to follow this Meridol structure in my work. I'm going to do what I can to show trust scholars that this is the way they, and eventually we, should go. Not realizing at the time I was contributing to some kind of rivalry between two elite Catholic institutions in the Notre Dame-centric direction. But what Meridol had done was something very similar to what I did with my justice measure, which was there's a whole bevy of ways to think about how you can evaluate authority from the perspective of trust. Are they competent? Does this place care about me? Do they show concern for me? What about their values? What about their principles? What about their honesty? And they took that spectrum of stuff and distilled it into three constructs: ability, benevolence, and integrity. They also added structure to the rest of the literature, which included behaviors and personality traits and all kinds of different constructs. And they said, what ability, benevolence, and integrity do is they drive your perceptions of trustworthiness, how trustworthy your boss is, or the organization is. That trustworthiness gives you a rational reason to trust, to be willing to accept vulnerability to some authority. And that trust has a behavioral expression, which is risk-taking. You decide to share something that is sensitive. You decide to rely on somebody else for a really important task. You stick your neck out trying to do something innovative or creative, knowing that you might fail in doing so. And so to give you a sense of what these things are, these are their measures. What I didn't do, that I really, really wish I would have done many, many years ago, is write a better one of these. Because as many of us in this room know, this measure does not get what you want psychometrically. I think the alpha in the actual original paper was 52. I've gotten 47, I've gotten 44. And so what Mayer and colleagues have done is come out with a second version of it, and then a third version of it. And so what pretty much we all do now is we just use all three. We put them all together. We try to get to 70, and we just, hope that the CFA consequences aren't that bad. So I should have done another measurement paper way back when, but I didn't. But I did do a meta-analysis that tested their model, showed that their model was very, very well supported structurally. Brent Scott was the second author on that paper. Brent, of course, interviewed here for my position before I did. And one of the important parts of that is Brent's like, I don't think I'm going to take it. I'm just so happy at Michigan State. They've treated me so well. But you know what? I actually do think they're going to start a PhD program. Like, Brent, no way. I mean, I've been hearing that for 20 years. Like, no, seriously. I think they're going to do it. And you, of course, said the same. All right, well, then I'm going to give this a second look if Brent really thinks that they are going to do it. And sure enough, Martin, he did it. Well, I want to give you a sense of some more recent stuff, especially stuff that's not meta-analytic, that has a little bit more vivid details behind it. Now, something important happened at Florida, which is that Tim Judge was hired away by Mike Krant. I blame Mike most of all, to Notre Dame. And that process drug on for, I would say, 5 months. And so I'm sure that was stressful for Mike. I know it was stressful for Mike. It was very stressful for us. It was like this 5 months of, so what do you think the odds are today, Tim? Like, you 50-50 still, 45, 55? But when Tim decided to take the job here, Jeff Lapine's phone started ringing. My phone started ringing. Both of us, our phones stopped ringing. People were like, no one's going to leave Florida. They're too happy there. And so Jeff took a job at Arizona State. And so Catherine and I had decided, are we going to be lifers in Gainesville, or are we going to look around as well? And University of Georgia at that point, they had really good young faculty, but they didn't have as many senior faculty. They didn't have someone to run what had become a fairly dormant PhD program, and someone to do just all the stuff that we know full professors have to do. So we moved to Athens, Georgia, a group that became great, remains great, helped build a PhD program that became great and remains great, but included a lot of folks who also wanted to do work on justice and trust. And so I spent much of that 9 years with this kind of structure in mind, but not wanting to do this structure exactly, but something that was more novel and interesting and impactful in the context of this structure. And so one of the ones that Cindy and I worked on back at the end of both of our times at Florida, what about trust in coworkers? And does it matter what you're trusting them to do? We had a colleague who had access to a sample of Gainesville firefighters. And this is a process you go through often when doing field work in OB, is you have access to a sample. There's something idiosyncratic about that sample. You want to use that idiosyncrasy while still contributing to whatever the literature is that you're focusing on. And what struck us about firefighters is their jobs have an interesting duality. Spend 90% of their time doing really mundane, routine, typical stuff. They inspect equipment. They do drills. They cook food. They clean up the firehouse. They do community service stuff. But 10% of their time is spent doing really dangerous, really urgent stuff. So we came up with this dichotomy that we called typical trust and dangerous trust, or typical trust and urgent trust. We kept going back and forth between those two labels. The reviewers hated dangerous and they hated urgent. Reviewer 2 made us call it high reliability trust, based on qualitative work and nuclear power plants and aircraft carriers, high reliability work being work where you really have to be careful. But man, it saps something from the term to call it high reliability trust. What we showed in the data is that this typical trust, the 90%, you're pretty loosey-goosey about how you come up with it. There's a lot of emotion in that. There's a lot of kind of group identification in that. But the high reliability stuff, the 10%, You're laser focused on gathering good data on that. What about on the back end? What about downstream from trust? By the way, this may be the last paper I've ever published with a regression table as the test of hypotheses. For the OB students, this is what a regression table looks like. There are these numbers on the side. These are steps in what's called a hierarchical regression. It's like a museum piece. We had 3 dependent variables in this paper. One of them was physical symptoms of stress. Do you worry yourself sick to the point where you're missing time because of illness? You've got that back pain, you've got indigestion or headaches. In terms of what drove physical symptoms, it was the higher reliability stuff. It was the 10%. That's what kept them up at night. Is this person going to follow me in to the burning building? But when it came time to predict who's going to leave this firehouse and take a job someplace else, that was the typical stuff. That was the 90%. Look, I'm at the elementary school on time. Where are you? We're both supposed to talk to the kids today. And then we also measured job performance, which was a more complicated story. We got access to all the logs of what people did during their fire calls and created a measure of higher reliability demands. How much was the 10% during the study? Was it like in that time period, 20%, 25%? The more dangerous stuff you were doing, the more of that higher reliability trust became louder in driving your performance. Well, what about a justice paper from this time period? This story that I've told with justice is a very employee-centric story. They receive some treatment from a boss, from an organization. And then what happens to them? But occasionally, the story does expand from there, especially when you vent to somebody else about the treatment that you received. And so we were interested in that, and we got access to a sample of bus drivers in London from the Go Ahead company. And I was actually in London just last year. Our middle kid is in vet school in London. And for his official visit day, his older brother and I went out there, and we were sitting on a bus just like that one, in the best seat, that front seat. And I said, you know what? I did a study on these folks. It's possible the driver underneath us right now was in my study. And I explained the whole thing to them. And they both looked at me and said, "That's great, Dad." And then stared out the window. They did not quite understand the nuance of the consensus shift and the theoretical lens that we were bringing to the table. But what was true of these drivers is often the boss would do something unfair to them, and they would get on their bus and drive around all alone for several hours and just ruminate until they all got back to the depot. And then in the break room or around the buses in the back, they would just vent about unfairness things. And so we were interested in what that venting would do, controlling for the unfairness. Obviously, something unfair has already happened. We want to control for that. We want to just know, what does the venting do? And we took an emotions lens in this paper, measuring afterwards anger towards the boss, but also hope about that interpersonal relationship, with those being predictors of whether you forgave the boss for the unfair treatment, and then eventually whether you did some of that citizenship stuff, that extra mile stuff, in a way that benefited the boss. And what sticks out most from this research is that unfairness talk, venting, it doesn't help you. It doesn't help you. It makes you even more angry and less hopeful, even when controlling for the initial unfairness, because it's keeping it top of mind. There's only one time where it stops hurting you that way, and that's when your coworker does a particular thing, which is to reframe it, to say something constructive to you that gets you to visualize that situation in somewhat of a different way to start to help you move on. But that was not a very common thing in the data. What do we do when people are venting to us? We say in a very supportive way, I know, right? It's the worst. Right? And that keeps that cycle going. I'll give you one more. Myra Davidson-Scorman's model was very much a rational view of trust. People think about levels of ability, levels of benevolence, levels of integrity. Well, at that point in time, there was some studies beginning to come out on less conscious sources of trust. For example, you meet a stranger. You don't know anything about their ability and benevolence or integrity, but their face is unusually symmetrical. It sends you a subtle, non-conscious cue to trust them. Well, we ended up doing something similar to this. We got access to a sample of KPMG accountants, also in London. This is my UK phase of my career. But it was an unusual sample in that they were brand new, going through about a 10-week probationary period. They didn't have a boss yet. They didn't have a team yet. And so the typical reference that we would often use as a trust scholar, they didn't possess. They did have an organization, but they all had the same organization. It's hard to build a study around that. But what they did have was different places that they worked in. And so we wondered, does the physical makeup of the place impact how much you wind up trusting this new organization that you just started working at? And so I measured two things. One was a construct from MIS that was mostly bounded in website trust. The web was newer at this point. Do I trust this website enough to put my credit card number into it? And a key construct in that space was situational normality. Does the place look normal? Does the site look normal? Situational normality is why every bank looks the same. It looks exactly as you'd expect it to, because you're about to give them money, and they want you to be comfortable giving them money. And so we measured that relative to whether these spaces they are working in seem normal, but we wanted to go beyond that. Because if you look at these spaces, they're actually quite beautiful architecturally. So we also measured situational aesthetics. Wherever you worked, and they worked in different places, how pleasing was that place aesthetically? How artistic did it seem? Did it have lots of wood? Did it have greenery, water treatments, things that bring to mind nature? Did it have natural light? many of you know that I'm somewhat aesthetically sensitive to our physical environment. If we're bringing in a job candidate or a PhD candidate, I will kind of wander around getting rid of straight chairs, trying to find a way for the hallway to look a little bit better. We use the 369 fishbowl a lot on visits, and there's this odd phenomenon of more and more chairs sprouting up in there. And so I kind of get rid of them. I don't throw them away. I just find some place in the building. I love the northwest stairwell. It's a great place for random fishbowl chairs to go and have a long, nice life somewhere else. But what we found with these two constructs is they shaped the perceived trustworthiness of KPMG. If you felt the place seemed normal, you thought, this is a more competent employer. You thought, this is an employer that has values and principles that I respect. You didn't quite get benevolence credit for perceived normality. But with aesthetics, in the same way that I trust someone with a balanced face, symmetrical face, I trust a company when things look a way that is pleasing to me. And that wound up shaping their trust at a really important time in their career, which had a practical benefit as well. These are brand new accountants. What do they got to do? They got to learn their jobs. And trust predicted that learning behavior as well. I'm more willing to take a little bit of extra time to bone up on something when I trust my employer. So that is my early work on justice and trust. That is some more recent stuff on those topics. But I wanted to talk about something that would be evocative in a way beyond that content, especially to people that are facing the challenge that John and me and others in the room face, which is, how do you stay motivated to do this stuff? Well, I began thinking about these issues when I was invited to contribute to a book where, I don't want to say renowned, people that have done pretty well were asked to reflect on their career. It's edited by Kevin Steensma and Xiaoping Chen at Washington. And there had been an earlier book kind of in this vein called Great Minds in Management. A lot of us have that book. I love that book. And I'm like, all right, well, I love that book. Maybe I'll do this one now. We all hate book chapters, right? We say yes in the moment because we feel obligated. And then we sit down to write. I'm like, why did I say yes to writing this book chapter? I have actual publications I need to be working on right now. But I said yes. I thought maybe this would be titled Great Minds of Management 2. Either the number 2 or TOO, either way would be really cool for me. But when I got a look at the other people that were in this book, I felt some small level of insecurity. Because they had all been trailblazers of a sort. They created some new literature. They did what Mike had done with Proactive Personality. They did what Dean had done with many parts of entrepreneurship. I hadn't done that. I took concepts that other people came up with, and I was a good caretaker of them. And I helped guide those concepts in a way that was helpful to the literature. And so I felt some insecurity, and that was even before reading chapter 1, where Blake Ashforth wrote the following: a great way to cement your reputation as a path paver, which Blake uses as an obverse of trailblazer, is to revise a scale or develop a new one, perform a meta-analysis, and publish at least 3 articles in your paved area. I thought, Blake, I resemble that remark. I'm right here. I'm 6 chapters down. I mean, I get now why you're chapter 1 and I'm chapter 7, but come on. And so I thought, well, why do I remain so happy to be doing this stuff this many years later? And I kept going back to a model, a framework from Gretchen Spreitzer, who at that point was at the University of Michigan. So, John, I shouldn't evoke Michigan as a Spartan on a talk like this. And as an alum, I want you to know, I looked for the most aesthetically unpleasing photo I could find of Michigan. I think I did good. This is a pretty ugly photo. I will also say, for no reason whatsoever, here's this photo. Who knows when I'm ever going to be able to put a photo like that up again? We certainly never beat Michigan in my 4 years in Bloomington. But Gretchen had come up with the concept of psychological empowerment. It's even worse to talk about because she actually published the paper when she was at USC, a rival school of Notre Dame. But in her view, a sense of intrinsic motivation is really built on 4 concepts. 1, self-determination, a sense of autonomy about why you're doing what you're doing. 2, competence. You're good at what it is that you're doing. 3, impact. You're making an influence. You're making a change on what's happening around you. And 4th, meaning. A sense that what you're doing has value, has significance. And she's got a measure, a good measure, I would say, of these concepts. And so what I did in the chapter is I got all of her norms for when these measures have been used to create kind of an average or a median. And I adapted them to our lives as researchers, as scientists. So if you're a scholar in the room today, I want you to answer those 3 items on that 1 to 7 scale. So give yourself a 1 to 7 for 1, for 2, and for 3, and then add them up. You actually do have to do it because I'm going to ask you in a minute, to raise your hand depending upon your number. This is not one of those times. You don't actually have to do what the speaker is asking. So the norm on this is a 17. Raise your hand if you are 17 or above on this. So this was what I had been able to do at Michigan State. I did a lot of work in the team lab. But if I wanted to do a training paper with Ray Noe, John was like, go for it. If I wanted to do a justice dissertation, John was like, go for it. All the years since, as soon as I got bored with something, if I got bored with something, I knew I could just stop doing it. If I found a topic that I started to like, identity, meaning, I could just start to do it. And so I think that's why a lot of us find our way in to this field. Just make sure that you keep that desire and keep that drive. If you do get bored with a topic, even a topic that's reliably finding its way into top journals, if you get bored with it, stop working on it. Start working on something else. Competence. Well, The first two papers that John and I published together at Michigan State were tests of the multi-level theory of team decision-making, which was a theory that John and Dan Ilgen came up with. Right? You created that out of whole cloth. I don't have that in me. I am not that kind of a creative person. I think at this point in my career, I'm a little bit better. But man, if I had spent my assistant professor years, or even my associate professor years saying, I want to write a lot of academy management review articles, would have had a lot of PhD students that did not get jobs, right? I think I did a good job of playing to my strengths. I did an invited presentation at Washington University in St. Louis some years ago. And there's a professor there, Chris Long, at the time, who also did work on justice and trust. And when he introduced me, he described me as a fixer. This is who you bring in when your literature's having problems. And he just kind of cleans it up. I thought, well, I don't know that a Michael Clayton or Winston Wolfe figure really ought to be in a book like this, but I do kind of like that, because I do think that's part of what my skill set is. I'm good at creating measures. I've done that in other literatures. Over the years, I've written some papers on how other people can create better measures. I think I'm good at both meta-analytic and narrative reviews in terms of creating a structure in a literature. But if you answer these three questions on that 1 to 7 scale, sum them up, how many of you are 18 or above? So this is fewer hands. It's partly because the PhD students don't feel like they're good at stuff yet. You'll get there. It will happen. Play to your strengths, especially early in your career. Play to your strengths. You've got the arc of time to develop the things that you are not quite as good at. This will also be a hard one for PhD students. Impact. How much of an impact do you have on your literatures of interest? Same exercise. This is going to be a lower number to be high on. Answer those three questions. How many of you are 14 or above on this? So Dean, you should raise your hand a little higher than that. Dean gave a little bit like this. Mike correctly went right up. I go back to my dissertation. One of the reasons why it didn't break through is that, team scholars, they were doing pretty well. They had a lot of constructs already to capture whatever it is that justice would bring to the table. And as for justice scholars, there just weren't a lot of them working in teams. We know why that is. Team research is really hard. You've got a sample of 400. Oh, that's great. 4-person teams? You've got a sample of 100. I'm going to go out and get twice as many folks to have in your study. But things like developing a measure, things like a meta-analytic review, things like testing a new theoretical perspective, those make big changes to a literature. I've tried in my career to do a lot of big papers, to not do a lot of smaller papers. And I know it's hard with tenure pressure. I know it's hard with promotion pressure. But focusing on doing those big things, I think is helpful. And last one, meaning. I'll ask you your numbers in a minute. I studied justice. I studied trust. I'm a comic book fan, and so when our kids were little, we spent a lot of time reading comic books. And my son Cameron, he knows that Superman fights for truth and justice. And so he asked me once when he was little, Daddy, what do you study? What are you writing about when you're at your computer? And I said, trust and justice. And he misremembered that as truth and justice. And one of those really cute misrememberings that you never correct because you just like hearing it. And every once in a while, he would say, Daddy, are you still fighting for truth and justice? Yes, I am, son. I'm still down here fighting for truth and justice. But I make bosses better bosses. I make employers better employers. I've been around Google executives when they use the term procedural justice in my presence. And I know I didn't make that. But I also know they know about it because they read my stuff. And there's some meaning in that. How many of you are 18 or above on this? So indulge in things that make you feel that meaning. That's one of the special parts of Notre Dame. That's one of the special parts of Growth and Good in Business. We have a lot of recruiting advantages here, but one of them is people's passions draw them here because a lot of people want to study things that are good and virtuous. In my case, and this is the example that John showed me, my work is meaningful because it helps get PhD students jobs. It helps them find a place to settle down with their family. It helps get them off to a good start in their career so that tenure and promotion pressures aren't quite as stressful for them. And so regardless of what a paper is about, there's meaning in that as well. And I can tell you, I feel a lot of meaning in doing this job here. I'm grateful to everybody in M&O that was part of recruiting me here 4 or 5 years ago. Grateful for Martin for being the interim dean at the time and then getting the full-time job and greenlighting the PhD program. Kathy and I put this picture in here for you. We love the swans at St. Mary's Lake. We walk around that lake quite often, and we always feel some level of anxiety if we don't see the swans right away. We'll get like 2/3 of the way around or 3/4 of the way around. We haven't seen them yet. Like, did something happen to them? Did they leave? Are they okay? And then we'll see them, and we're both very happy about that. This is an easy place to do stuff that is meaningful. All kinds of good research being done in these hallways, showcased in an event like this. And so I thank you for watching me talk about mine. I look forward to other chairs in this room seeing yours as well. Thank you for your attention. So I took Mike Krantz' advice and end early, and that's exactly what I've done. Any questions about justice, about trust, about finding your way in this academic life? Yeah, Luna. Oh, you want to go first?
When you see somebody who has 98 publications, 60 publications, what you guys don't see, Michael Jordan was the most shots of anybody in the NBA. I'm thankful that nobody ever kept record of my rejections. You don't get that many publications without getting a lot of rejections. What can you give people advice about taking rejection this business, you get rejected over and over and over again. Talk about handling rejection. Anybody had success? Boy, in this business, you young people are going to be up on a lot of rejection, even if you're super successful.
Yeah, I mean, the best advice that I offer them is your advice with Mike in Holodeck and Mariner, which is you got to go to the next place. And the tough part about going to the next place is you have to create a paper that can go to a lot of places. So the best way to handle rejection is before the paper has been conceived, is to create a paper that can go to ASQ, then AMJ, then JAP, then PSYCH, then OBHTP, then OrgScience. Sorry, I didn't mean to put it in that. It's not the right order. But there's not that many kinds of papers that can go all those places. So what does that mean? Well, it means don't do conceptual things. One of the reasons I've not become a good theory builder is I just haven't written that many AMRs, because if they get rejected, where do they go? And that's just a high wire act that I'm not willing to walk with PhD students. What else does that mean? It's hard to do stuff that is 4 experiments and 4 experiments only, because that can go to OBHTP and go to some psych journals as well, but it can't go to JAP, can't go to PSI, can't go to AMJ. So I'm always very mindful about creating and helping students create something that can go everywhere. And that way, when you get that rejection, it's on to the next place. It's Nick Saban, I think, or no, Bill Belichick. On to Indianapolis, on to Miami. It's like, okay, on to AMJ, on to JP. What would you add to that? Lynn. Values in terms of like an integrity sense, or? As a researcher or as someone who studies trust? Yeah, I mean, I think what I like about both of my research areas, I've had this conversation with you, Nick, before, it's like work changes in so many ways. Now AI is really changing so much what happens in an organization. Doesn't change what I study, though. It's just now I'm going to go from studying trust in a human boss or a more general organization to now, do I trust the algorithm? Now it's not the fairness of my boss's performance appraisal, my fairness of the algorithm. I think if you go beyond the referent of the trust, nothing really does change. It just is personified in such a different way. But there's still a sense of, is there some caring there? There's still a sense of, is there some consistency in words and deeds or promises and what's happened? So a lot of this is universal. And how do I know? If I read back and I keep reading back and I keep reading back the rabbit hole of a literature review, everything I do goes back to Aristotle. You can go back that far. It's really not that different than what Aristotle wrote about way back when. And that gives it kind of a universality that I really like. You want to... All right.
That's our gift. Thank you.
so much.
Congratulations. Gift for you, John. Thank you. That was beautiful. I think, John,
Let's drink, everybody.